Chapter 29. Ahsoka became the rocks at her feet, like the dust carried on the winds between her and her former master. She became the waters of Lake Nath some distance away, in the air that encompassed the broad stretch of valley that contained them all. She became a very force of nature, all in a suppressive effort to close off her thoughts and emotions to what remained of the man before her. She knew the man within the suit was far more attuned to the force around him than anyone had ever given him credit for, a skill that guided him throughout the very fabric of his own life, now used to further his gain. Anakin never had a son, she said, knowing that saying nothing would be tantamount to the same betrayal as giving Luke up through thought or emotion. Vader only responded with heavily regulated breaths, never peeling his helmeted gaze from her own. Long, tension-filled seconds passed between the two as wafts of debris-filled wind divided them, obscuring the images posed by one another as if specters in separate times and space. Detached from thought and emotion, Ahsoka felt the very nature of the Force flow into her, comprising all aspects of itself bundled tightly with equal parts love and hate, compassion and indifference, solemnity and frivolousness. She could sense the freedom her chosen path offered her as she embraced each one of the balanced facets the Force offered. She was the rock, the air, the water, and even the fire that burned severely at the planet's core. Obi-Wan would have had me believe the same, Vader finally responded, unable to penetrate her mind and comprehend the practice she was enacting. Yet he brought the boy to me nonetheless, he finished with a noticeably quicker pace in his respirations, an action that cost him his life. Ahsoka knew the truth, although she couldn't rightly explain how she knew. She could sense Obi-Wan's presence within the Force she was strongly connected to at the moment, yet she knew there would be no interference on his part. What happened here was between her and Vader. If a boy exists, what interest would that even be to you? Ahsoka said without reservation and without enough openness to remain elusive in conclusion. She had not moved 1 centimeter, her arms still locked before her chest and her waist canted slightly. The winds ripped at her head, wrapping once more as if in a natural push to force the two closer. Vader's respiration ceased for a long moment as the winds subsided. The battle that hadn't suspended itself continued to transpire in some version, bereft of the sounds that should accompany it. So that he may join me, Ahsoka. His respirator registered deeply with a quick cadence of rhythmic inhales and exhales before normalizing. In my effort to end the suffering of the galaxy and destroy the Emperor. Ahsoka had expected all manner of euphemisms or stalling tactics, but not the words that escaped the man's vocator. She nearly dropped her guard to dive into ferocious emotions and compelling thoughts ranging from utter belief in what she heard to outright contempt. She could shield her mind through sheer will and concentration enough to contain the aspects of herself that could convey what she so desperately wanted to keep from him. Although her thoughts and emotions remained safe, she felt her window to respond closing quickly, another aspect of this exchange that could also lead the man down the path of discovery. His Excellency's loyal apprentice moves to remove the hand that feeds him. Is that it then? Vader didn't hesitate. It is the way of the dark side, Ahsoka. He finally dropped his open hand to his side, closing his thumbs over the rim of the belt at his waist. No, Anakin, it is not. That is the way of the Sith, Ahsoka responded just as quickly. It shouldn't surprise me that you do not know the difference, yet I am just the same. You don't know the power of the dark side, Vader began, but Ahsoka cut him off before he could finish. But I do, Anakin, in ways you couldn't even comprehend, she said with ferocious conviction. I will not waste time educating you on something you claim to own. That discovery is for you to make for yourself. She decided to continue. But I ask you, Lord Vader, she enacted a mock curtsy, what is it that you find yourself chasing after the same agenda you began 20 years ago? She briefly let him ponder the question, while your master chases immortality. She knew it was only supposition in her mind, suspicion she held with only a fraction of proof and support, but enough of a dagger to let his mind wander further off topic. The increased cadence of his respirations affirmed Ahsoka that he was indeed thinking along those lines. His lack of verbal retort assured her he held the same suspicions. You see, Anakin, that you leave yourself exposed to your own emotion as your thoughts trail off toward topics you always carry with you. Let go of your resentments, let go of your anger and hatred, and become the man you've been dying to be. She knew precisely what she would say next, but remained unsure of how it would be received. She'd gotten this far without interruption. It is your turn to walk down those steps, Anakin. Put the temple behind you for the first time in decades, and accept the freedom of being who you were destined to be. She felt the welling of tears in her own eyes as she mentally prepared for her following words carefully. Take my hand, Anakin, and we'll descend those steps together. What is done is done. Let go of the past. She forgot where she was for a moment as she saw the mental images play through her mind, the shock in her master's eyes as she told him she needed to venture down her path alone. The tears that threatened to betray her lack of emotion finally got their way as they snaked down her cheeks, soaking the wrappings slackening in the sustained winds. She watched through her blurred vision as Vader dropped his arms from their perch at his waist and his shoulders dropped slightly from the sudden weight of fate. Even his gaze dropped as she witnessed his head droop forward instantly as he watched the eddying trails of dust and sand drift past his boots through the dark orbs of his faceplate. I do not regret my actions, Ahsoka. I will make that clear. The Jedi needed to be purged, but since then, you and I have been pursuing the same agenda, Vader said, lifting his helmeted head back up to face her. Your actions on Mustafar did not escape my notice. Ahsoka contorted her face in genuine confusion. He can't be referring to the fortress, she thought in earnest. No, Vader said in response to her failure to contain her thoughts. The relay station. Genuine confusion gave way to genuine surprise at the revelation. What of it? Ahsoka asked in response. I have had numerous opportunities to turn Force-sensitive children, younglings, over to the Emperor and have thwarted each and every one by destroying the information outright, Vader said, his respirations coming in a hastened rhythm again. To what end, Anakin? Why go to such lengths to deceive your own master? She thought absently again, wary of giving him any further insight into the thoughts and emotions she would die to protect. Although she knew the question she posed in thought might as well have been said aloud, he let the moment go as she pieced together her conclusions. A thought flashed through her mind, one that she was helpless to conceal from his probing. Ahsoka's eyes flared wide at her sudden realization. Because you thought your supposed offspring may have been among them. She posed, doubling down on her efforts to further conceal her emotions, which were beginning to adhere to the darker side of the balance she had achieved. Reality is hardly supposition, Ahsoka. I know the boy is alive, and my motives remain unchanged. His respirations were surprisingly quickening from their already frantic pace. You threaten me without hesitation, and continue to lie to me at every opportunity, Ahsoka. Yet you work to convince yourself that you are no Jedi. I will find Luke with or without your assistance, and together we will bring about the end of the Emperor. Even he has foreseen this, Vader said, raising a hand to clench a mechanical fist before them both. Ahsoka nearly lost control of the tether she precariously maintained over her emotion upon hearing Luke's name, yet felt strangely odd that his retort considering the Jedi had not registered the same response. However, she let the thought pass as she regained her composure. Then the two of you work against one another amidst the suffering of trillions, Anakin. Do you not see how unserene that is? Why there is such significant effort to stand up against your empire? Look around you, Anakin. Look at what you're fighting against in the here and now, she said, splaying both arms wide open. Do you even know who they are? He only stared at her, unwilling to be baited into the topic he cared nothing for. Yet he knew the answer would be what his generals had been warning against for some time. Because, Anakin, I don't even know. Your foolishness has bred this, and it will only continue to multiply until the Empire is a galactic footnote. Think, Anakin. She could feel herself pulling at the tethers of his suppressed emotion as she contended to keep her own in line. You can choose, right now, which side of this continuing confrontation you will be a part of. A sudden thought assailed her thoughts as if sourced well outside her frame of mind. The Jedi are gone, Anakin. What remains is free from the very tenets you and I took exception to. Begin anew, Anakin. Redefine the narrative and let the Jedi return. He froze in place for what felt like eons, that thought crossing his mind on more than one occasion. For a fraction of a second, he let his mind wander, untethered to his continuous rage, into the realm of imagination and fantasy. Positioning himself in the very seat Ahsoka had suggested, and becoming what, for decades, he had hunted. At that moment, he saw himself free from the umbilical limitations of his suit, armor, and helmet. He saw himself showing a sandy-haired little boy how to execute the first form of lightsaber techniques properly. He saw the older boy execute the combined routine of forms 3 through 6 flawlessly. But then he saw an image of Mace Windu mocking him, an image of Master Yoda looking up at him with disgust. He saw Obi-Wan scolding him, and then he saw Padme dead at his feet. His mind reverted to the present, the winds blowing harder between him and his former apprentice as she slowly twisted her head from side to side, the wrappings about her face blowing free, revealing her facial features in their entirety. The disappointment registered in her eyes as she curled her lips inward with disgust. The problem you refuse to acknowledge, Anakin, is your lack of courage. Never in my life would I have found reason to utter those words. Until now. Ahsoka said as she continued to sway her head in disbelief. All that you can imagine should have been possible had you the courage to let go of your anger. Yet here we are. Despite trying to the contrary, her voice sounded mocking. My anger is my asset, Ahsoka, Vader retorted. Yet Ahsoka was prepared. No, Anakin, it is your tether. You know the truth of it, yet refuse to accept it. She finished shaking her head from side to side, the words coming slowly as she narrowed her eyes. Ahsoka felt a shift through the edifice of the Force, a paradigm shift that brought with it negative energies, and she knew that any window through which to reach her former master had shuttered itself from her efforts. All that remained was the mechanical shell of the man she had only once known. You will never understand the powers you seek, Darth Vader, only the effects of the hatred you sow. She blew out a breath and began to shift her feet to finish her arc around him, remaining mindful of both his position and continuing threat, but unwilling to force an engagement of her terms. Ahsoka completed her arc and began to wrap the cloth tightly around her head once more. Removing her gaze from her former master, she looked toward her friends some distance away. Within 3 steps, she heard him ignite his lightsaber once again, the static in the air levying the blade with chaotic discharges, causing the hum of the weapon to vibrate within the spectrum of high and deep tones. She didn't pause to take her 4th step or 5th as she closed her eyes and pulled deeply within the Force, drawing from every current willing to consent. She drew her right hand about her chest and motioned slowly with caressing fingers in a slow downward motion as she continued to distance herself from the Sith Lord, never once looking back toward him as she heard the extinguishing hiss of the blade in his hands punctuate the verbal exchange. She could feel the man shift from his tempest of anger through the tendrils of the Force to outright contempt at her audacity. Ahsoka sensed the split-second exchange about to take place before he'd even reignited his saber. Within seconds, she casually dodged to the right, and a white-hot blast from Kawani's A-180 scorched over her left shoulder. She heard before she saw the reignition of the crimson blade as she let her momentum take her body into a side roll. She listened to the deflection of the bolt of energy, redirecting itself from the blade he held before him. Before she could blink her eyes, Ahsoka had called the hilts of both of her sabers to her hands, had them ignited, and crossed them before her chest, redirecting the bolt of energy yet again into the ground between them with a cloud of sand and dust. The distance between them brought the sounds of battle that had been eerily absent earlier. Ahsoka stood fully erect from her quickly executed defensive stance and lowered both sabers in unison. "You've asked your question, Lord Vader, and I've given you my answer. We both know you will not be leaving with the clone, so you've no other reason for being here." Vader found no words to speak through the incredulous comment. Although guilty of treason for crimes against the Empire, CT-7567 was no consequence toward his efforts here. He focused on the huddled trio 40 meters distant, pinpointing reticles within the helmet and focusing on each individually. Vader was taken aback upon seeing the clone, Anakin within staunchly correcting his own mind that the clone had a name but couldn't remember it. "To whom do you refer, Ahsoka?" Vader thought to himself amid a bright flash that threatened to steal his sight entirely, before the visual compensator dampens its effects fully from within the helmet. The effect was instantaneous as he could distinguish a bolt of dry lightning slamming into the ground between himself and the Togruta, causing the hem of his cape to flare wide behind him. The reticle centered upon the Mandalorian who had fired the shot and destroyed his fighter. She had also fired the shot that had thwarted the lunge he had intended to make. Finally, he focused on Thana, the name Barriss had taken as a study to his own master. He felt her gaze penetrate his own as she stared at him, unblinkingly, unmoving. "Whom, Ahsoka?" he thought again to himself, and again within screaming to be heard with a single phrase. "All of them." Ahsoka glared at Vader as a lightning bolt slammed into the ground between them. An assault of grainy bits of rock and sand showered her as she shielded her eyes from their effects. The unnatural storm was becoming more menacing with each passing second, the very lightning taking on a life of its own as it crackled with burning intensity, parting the swirling debris clouds as it danced across the valley's surface. She began to feel rhythmic tremors shake the foundations of the ground she was standing on, tremors she knew had nothing to do with the storm. One solitary chord pierced through the chaotic sounds of battle, sending a shiver down her spine. A series of distinctive metallic clanks, footpad compensator, yaw strut, and ankle pitch brake that only came from the Imperial armored behemoths. Seconds later, the ground seized with yet another tremor. Ahsoka knew they needed to leave. Vader felt the tremors through his own boots, as he knew he would. Veers was close. However, his mind would not let itself wander beyond her statement, no matter what form of distraction showed itself to him. "I am not here for CT-7567. I know you're not. If you were, we'd have had a much different conversation, Vader. A very one-sided conversation," Ahsoka said in earnest, beginning again to close the gap. The winds blowing a sheen veil of sands between them. "I am referring to Nara," Ahsoka continued, finding herself tormented by choice. She knew she needed to prioritize the safety of her friends, yet the burning desire to deliver his fate to him right here and now evaded any suppression. "It's this place, Ahsoka," she said to herself, as the veil of debris clouded her vision of Vader completely. She focused on the Force entirely to find him, unmoving, as she crossed her feet one over another, letting the folds of her cloth wrap drape about her fully. Ahsoka could sense Nara's presence, as if the woman were whispering in her ear. Fingers spread wide as her hands waved slowly yet chaotically through the air before her. Ahsoka mimicked the motion she saw in her mind with her own hands as the swirling eddies of browns and yellows swam between her fingers, the tips of which guided the flows willingly. She felt herself become the winds, dancing through time and space, a natural elegance that concealed her entirely from his view. She could see him turn his head, searching for a sign of her. Ahsoka let herself drift through the ribbons of sand as they swirled up and down, left and right. The billowing folds of Ahsoka's cloak mimicked the facets of the wind-borne natural chaos as it blended in with the churning debris. She felt she was in deep meditation as she gave as much of herself to the Force as she let in, a consensual relationship that felt like home. It was the only way she could suppress the anger that refused to be diminished. Vader's revelation had sparked a violent rage that she had successfully concealed from his probing, but was beginning to take its toll. She felt the dark side well within her, waiting for her invitation to unleash itself through her actions. Ahsoka knew she could not allow herself to give into it. Her friends were here with her, and she would die to protect them before she would allow them to die over a moment of indiscretion. Nara, Vader asked, his mind looking for a measure of purchase within the suddenness of the chaotic scene. Thana? He asked again as the name drew the only logical conclusion. That's impossible, he thought, scanning through the storm with his optical enhancement as he swiveled his head. Thana is the former Jedi Ophi, Ahsoka. He was sure of it, had been assured of it. He continued looking about him for a hint, a trace of the elusive Togruta, without success, yet he knew she had gone nowhere. Why so certain? She replied, Vader swiveling as his boot kicked a loose stone that scattered soundlessly across the rocky ground. Knowing she should have been directly over his shoulder, given location of her whispering voice. Because you've been told otherwise, she whispered again, this time Vader swiveling to his other side. Show yourself, Ahsoka, end this game, Vader said as his respirations heaved his massive chest, his annoyance churning the ever-present hate within. I've gone nowhere, Vader. I am where I am, where you've left me, and I you, she replied, her voice reverberating in his mind. Her whisper continued, Your hate and rage have blinded you, my old friend. Search what remains of Anakin's thoughts and feelings, Vader, and ask yourself why you would be so deceived. She paused momentarily, contemplating the suggestion for a split second before the roiling anger renewed its grip over his senses, obliterating any doubt she was trying to sow. You've claimed to be anything but a Jedi, yet your lies remain consistent, Ahsoka. A master of lies, Vader said, letting the ebbs and flows of emotions, those of rage, wrath, and deep-rooted resentment, fuel his reach into the dark side. Now who's stalling, Vader? Ahsoka said, the swirling storm that had been her veil from his sight parted, a meter before him as she slowly stepped through the sands. You see how easily deceived you can become through your own hate. Now ask yourself how easily your reason can deceive you. She was sure he wouldn't understand, but she didn't care. As her thoughts pushed forward, Ahsoka felt the encumbrance and immediacy of the decision she would be forced to make in the next few seconds. She recalled her time on Dagobah, hearing the words of the diminutive Jedi Master echo through her mind. You, Anakin, will be the architect of your salvation, Ahsoka thought with sincere clarity, doing nothing to suppress it from Vader's reach. Obi-Wan thought as you do, a sentiment he took to his grave, Vader responded, an exacerbated hum, adding a measure of finality to his statement as he raised his saber before him perpendicular to the ground. I grow tired of the games, Ahsoka. If you will not tell me where my son is, I will find him alone. Ahsoka shut her eyes tight to the comment, growing weary from the effort needed to hold the advancing anger within her in check. Every muscle in her body twitched in anticipation, yearning to be released from their temporary stasis as she fought through the intensive waves of rage, all centralized on the single course of action she had pledged to avoid. Master, stay my hand, she thought through her mind, damning Vader's ability to read the thought with even measure of her seething wrath. Your thoughts betray you, Vader said unsurprisingly, yet trailed off suddenly, which surprised her. It is of no consequence, Ahsoka. You will either answer to a new master or die by my blade, he said as he began walking slowly toward her position. I will fulfill my promise to you, one way or another. The swirling winds increased dramatically as Ahsoka snapped her eyes open. Her pupils intensified the anger behind them as they constricted into tiny black specks within a sea of radiant blue. She turned her head slowly to look at her friends, huddled closely together between rocky formations that disappeared into the swirling storm above them. She could feel each one of them nod the approval she wasn't sure she wanted. Every instinct within seemed to be trapped within the same conundrum her mind was weighing. She could hear the vibrating hum of Vader's saber, closing the distance between them, knowing he was preparing himself to end her. Ahsoka felt no fear as the moment seemed to stretch into an eon of hesitation. Only the weight of the myriad consequences facing the man outright would conjure. Whom would I betray if I ended him? Do I have the strength to resist the Emperor in his stead should I succeed? Do I honor the sacrifice of the Lars family, of Obi-Wan's? Padme? Can I turn him? Should I? The questions would stymie the collective Jedi Council itself. She knew, yet here she was, the sole possessor of the decisions to be made, yet only a solitary inheritor of the consequences that would result. The fate of the galaxy. It was too much to digest in the fractions of seconds she had yet at her disposal. Then I will do as I must, she said under her breath as Vader stepped into striking distance, his arm raised to shoulder height. Ahsoka drew in a deep breath, her chest heaving from the pressure put upon it by her contracting diaphragm, and spun into a low crouch facing the machine her master had become. She had decided, as she called her sabers to her hands, closed her eyes as she ignited them and swung them immediately up and over her back, crossing them to block the severe downward thrust Vader initiated. She swiveled in the crouched position with a deft foot-over-foot crawl, letting his momentum slide down her primary blade, his saber burying itself in the stone at her feet. Ahsoka continued the crouched swivel, carrying her spinning form closer to his right boot. Vader countered with a reflexive spin that brought him out of the saber's reach just before she severed the appendage from the ankle down. She noted his corrective foot planting behind his shoulder, giving her an unattended opening. She immediately launched herself from her feet as she extinguished her sabers, landing a full-force kick to his right knee, then quickly rolling to the left to prepare for a follow-up strike as she reignited the blades again. Vader stumbled backward, nearly falling to his left knee as his boot slid on the sand-covered surface of the rocky valley, but he recovered quickly enough to form a defensive stance that prevented Ahsoka from taking advantage of the uninspected window. Impressive. You've learned much, it seems, in my absence, he said as he brought his blade up before him again. Vader, I've learned much despite you, she responded, letting the force flow through her entirely. This doesn't have to end as either of us imagine it. She finished with an exhale, watching his left hand with more curious interest than his dominant, waiting for him to flow predictably into the unexpected. Ahsoka didn't wait as she followed the flows of the force through and into anything close. Several large boulders and broken stones from the canyon lay a few meters to either side. Again, she did not wait. She focused on Vader as her center, bringing a trio of them rushing toward him. Vader dodged the first, spun to split the second in half, but ran out of time to contain the third as it slammed into his back, spilling him forward and directly toward the waiting white blazing sabers Ahsoka held before her.